There is something interesting about the intersection of music and time. It is something about time itself, really. The lyrical content of a given song concerning the time or tense in which the events described are taking place has one of the strongest impacts on the connection that the song's listeners build with it. Songwriters proficient in writing music of a specific genre tend to focus on one specific tense within the three basic categories: the past, present, and future. Pop music in particular often elects for the present tense. Writers seek to capture the all-too-human tendency to live in it, under the assumption that it is there where we might live most freely. Hot Shell Ray, an American pop band from Nashville, Tennessee, do so glaringly in Tonight Tonight from their sophomore album Whatever. They are going at it tonight. They are dancing on the edge of the Hollywood sign. Rihanna in Don't Stop the Music from 2007's Good Girl Gone Bad. It is getting late. She is making her way over to her favorite place. These all are actions described as occurring in this here and now, immersing the listener deeply in an alternative point of view, and it comes as no surprise that these songs would go on to achieve widespread popularity. In a sense, this is music for the ideal state of mind. In these examples, as well as countless others throughout this era of pop music, the artist put forth a set of circumstances that the average listener itches to find themselves in. Breaking free from the monotony of day-to-day life, willfully entering a state of blissful ignorance and hedonistic pursuit, and cherishing the moments that humanity brings are all themes explored in both of the aforementioned songs. And in the case of the latter, too, acknowledging that at some point, this special moment of self-expression, of present living, must at some point or another draw to a close. Here, even when the future's existence is implied as a mere possibility, Rihanna pushes firmly against it and stands in the present, even suggesting to a prospective suitor the concept of entering an abstract environment in which time plays no role in the human experience. When songs are written in the present tense, it can be assumed that time as it is traditionally known is sought to be ignored. This alternative form of time passes instead in a series of explicitly depicted moments, blurring together as the mind and body do, with no clear indication of concrete durations between each one, mirroring perfectly how one might interpret the passage of time during a high-energy, enjoyable, and memorable experience in one's life. By contrast, songs that are past-centric become far more versatile in their constructed worlds and interpretations thereof. The passage of time, an unavoidable and unrelenting force of the universe, is inherent to these songs' very existence. Even in the description of one very powerful moment, placing it within the past tense powerfully shifts the manner in which such a moment is perceived by the listener. Phil Elverum's groundbreaking indie folk album, released under his former pseudonym The Microphones, The Glow Part 2, makes use of the past tense to create a very powerful narrative that courses deep through the album's runtime. Inspired in large part by the singer's previous relationship and subsequent falling out, the track The Moon is written entirely in the past tense as Elverum croons about the loneliness of revisiting places and activities once shared with a lover. Time here is explored in multiple interwoven forms, reminiscing all at once about the relationship he once was in, how it ended, and the moments he spent attempting to cope with the aftermath of the breakup. The introduction of the past has also found its way into modern pop music as the genre's sound has taken a more alternative turn, inspired by genres more introspective, intimate by nature. Steve Lacy's Bad Habit exemplifies this longing in its infectious hook that took the popular social media platform TikTok by storm in the summer of 2022. I wish I knew you wanted me. Capturing another facet of the human condition, romantic love, Elverum and Lacy here both paint the picture of a young person made directionless by the turmoil that comes with a heartbreak. In this way, the past swallows the present whole, eschewing the here and now and instead dissociating into an emotional, memory-driven fugue. Music written of love, especially of tragic love, tends to evoke this displacement out of time and often serves as the perfect drug for those looking to escape from its ceaseless march. The universe crafted by these songs is, then, all the more immersive when the very basis of the story it tells is to lift the listener out of their place in time into one very specific, emotionally charged moment. Foregoing the discussion of the future tense as it presents itself in popular music, as it is generally an element used with moderation into songs as opposed to one that forms the groundwork for them, the next logical step in this exploration of tenses is the usage of two or more within a single work. Delving into this concept following the previous two may initially seem rudimentary. Any written work, after all, will more often than not make use of more than one tense. Aubrey Graham, known mononymously by his middle name Drake, uses all three basic tenses in his debut solo single released in 2010, Over. The past in I did it overnight, it couldn't happen any quicker. The present in I know way too many people here right now that I didn't know last year. And the future in I
I'll probably still be the man when everything is over.
When this tense mixing is executed in a very specific manner, however, songs transcend the general boundaries of popular music. Whether it be a short biography on the artist in the case of Over, or a straightforward tale of two persons coming together to bask in the fleeting moment in Don't Stop the Music. With the right production and lyricism, songs that incorporate multiple different tenses begin to evoke a feeling both uniquely powerful and powerfully unique: nostalgia. An amalgamation of the Greek words nostos, meaning to return home, and algos, meaning pain, that came about in the mid-18th century, the word encapsulates a phenomenon that the world at large has grown all too familiar with, in the present day especially. A sort of chronic homesickness, a present longing for a fonder time in the past. From the baby boomer mumbling to themselves on the recliner about the good old days, to the millennial remembering their family's first personal computer, nostalgia has pervaded all walks of life for centuries. Members of Generation Z, however, seem to be experiencing this phenomenon at quicker rates than seemingly any other generation before them. Quick enough that they can translate these sentiments to profound musical statements that both derive from their childhood and create a new sound all their own, perhaps due to both living through an onslaught of major world events within recent years and the rather bleak future to come depicted by recent news headlines. Jane Remover, a 19-year-old trans woman from Newark, New Jersey, has cemented their name in the underground electronic music production scene as one of the pioneers of this new form of nostalgia felt through sound. Having begun music production as early as 2011, inspired by figureheads of electronic dance music such as Skrillex, Kill the Noise, and Virtual Riot, Remover would go on to experiment with making a myriad of different subgenres of EDM throughout the mid-2010s. In 2018, they found themselves at the forefront of the development of a new microgenre called digicore, joining multiple production collectives during this time and creating fast-paced, high-pitched, and heavily distorted hip-hop instrumentals for other rappers in the genre's SoundCloud scene, initially shying away from taking on vocal performances themselves until a couple years later. After the release of a multitude of singles and an extended play, Teen Week, that would go on to amass over 100,000 streams within the first 2 weeks of its availability on streaming platforms, she released her debut studio album, Frailty, in late 2021 via the Dead Air Records label. Frailty, undeniably, is an album that bleeds with nostalgia. Many of the songs on the project are pitched slightly higher than their original keys, putting them in microtonal areas that emulate the 16-bit music of older video games, especially Undertale and Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, which inspired the album's overall atmosphere. Stating in an interview with Insider that nearly all the songs they make are about crossing the barrier between childhood and adulthood, Remover seeks to rekindle flames of the former in both the lyrical content and the production style of Frailty. The usage of an effect called bit crushing exemplifies both the aforementioned video game soundtrack inspiration, as well as conjuring to the ear the sound of a low bitrate YouTube video from 2008. Melodic motifs introduce themselves and reintroduce themselves like an old memory. All things considered, this is a project predicated on the very concept of nostalgia. It comes as no surprise to her listeners, then, that Remover has an entire body of work dedicated to the remixing of songs from their childhood and of the present day with their signature chaotic, fast-paced, and multi-layered production style. Given the tongue-in-cheek moniker DariaCore after the former MTV animated sitcom Daria, Jesse Tacanelli, the founder of the aforementioned Dead Air Records, described the microgenre as electronic music that's been filtered through over a decade of the internet's love-hate relationship with big stage EDM and dubstep, and their primary influences, as mentioned before, already give credence to such a statement. Here again do the past and present collide at Mach speed. The rapid firing of lasers and distorted drum samples meet the likes of former boy band Big Time Rush, pop legend Mariah Carey, and even relatively newer artists such as rapper Cardi B and the English bedroom pop musician Pink Pantheress. As songs in the DariaCore series of albums whiz by at breakneck speeds, with many tracks lasting no longer than 2 or 3 minutes, it may be hard upon first listen to pin down exactly what is happening, as one might reflect upon their own childhood as an adult in the present. Cultural references of the present via snippets of popular TikTok trends and viral videos combined with songs of the past entangle themselves in one another and become a paroxysm of sound that quickly becomes an emotional experience felt throughout the body. However, this facet of Remover's music alone is what makes it so unique and so important. Not only does it intersperse both the past and the present, perhaps mirroring an idyllic childhood viewed through the lens of a chaotic adulthood, but a future is imagined here too. No other project exists like Frailty, and certainly none like the DariaCore series. Critics and interviewers alike agree that Remover is in a genre all their own. Formerly at the cutting edge of one of the newest genres in electronic music, they broke clean off into their own sound and redefined the scenes whence they came, just as their influences had years before. Exploring the framework upon which any given song is built is a task that, at its very core, is an interdisciplinary one. Much is to be considered with any piece of art and its place in the sphere that it occupies beyond an analysis of the musical content itself. From where did it come? In other words, who exactly is the artist, and what are the primary influences and inspirations that led to the music's creation? Another question: how does it choose to present itself? This question ties itself most closely into the tenses involved. Is it a retrospective look on the events in the singer's life, like the moon, or does it posit an ideal present, like Don't Stop the Music? However, it also transcends the music in favor of an analysis of the aesthetic with which it is bundled, including important aspects such as the song's title and the stylization thereof, as well as the art that accompanies it. What is arguably most important to ask, though, is simple. What statement might it be making, either intentionally or unintentionally? These questions tend to get very complicated and in truth have no clear-cut answer. Music, let alone art as a whole, is made for a myriad of reasons, and from there, further discussions could begin on the necessity of reason and meaning in art entirely. Remover themselves, however, summarize their artistic expressions succinctly. Speaking on Frailty's overarching message with Insider, they proclaim that, despite the pressure to become an adult when you turn 18, you still have so much time left, and you can still do the things you used to do, like play video games. Even with the expert inclusion of all three basic tense categories in a large majority of their music, the concept matters not to them. Music, to Remover, is an expression of the self, and all the same a reminder that expression and who they are is not only valid, but something to be embraced with open arms. This concept of different names being used for music by the same person is of course nothing new. Artists of all different mediums, not just music, have opted to release their works under a name that does not match their birth name for centuries. This practice is most commonly observed in literature with the concept of pen names. Common historical examples thereof include Samuel Clemens writing as Mark Twain, Emily Bronte as Alice Bell, and the collective of James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay as Publius. These prominent figures elected to obscure their own identities for a myriad of reasons. Twain chose his name in reference to his previous work as a member of a steamboat crew, wherein the phrase Mark Twain signified a water depth of 12 feet, a career that would shape the themes and style of his work after his departure from the job. Bronte elected for a masculine pen name due to both the time period in which she wrote, the early 19th century, a period of significant sexual prejudice predating the American women's rights movement by nearly a century and a half, as well as her interest in a quiet life away from controversies and major publicity. The three aforementioned men that comprised the pseudonym Publius, under which the pivotal collection of essays known as the Federalist Papers was published in 1788, chose to conceal their true identities out of fear of persecution from the government and its construction that they were criticizing in their work. In these historical examples, it is observed that the nom de plume often took on more of a utilitarian role in the presentation of the work rather than an aesthetic one. However, this naming practice is also present in works of the same time, namely outside of the realm of literature. The visual arts of East Asia carry with them too a rich history of pseudonyms, known as art names or go in Japanese. Artists studying under mentors as apprentices would be assigned an art name deriving from that of their superiors, reminiscent of the dynastical system of government to which Japan adheres. They would then sign all their works with that name, notably predating the common practice of attributing one's own work to themselves, which arose with the advent of the printing press. These art names would often be changed in parallel with significant events occurring in the artist's life, and their work would then in turn reflect these changes. A modern example of the use of the pseudonym in terms of visual art is found in the work of Banksy, whose real name has remained unknown since becoming active in street art in the early 1990s. His use of an alternate name not only obscured himself from persecution, but also allowed his work to become respected worldwide while being able to maintain a life away from the limelight. The concept of the pseudonym is thus one that has a rich history in multiple different artistic fields. The tackling of the abstract within these fields not only speaks for itself in the content generated, but also heavily relies on how this content is presented to the viewer. I posited in part 1 that one of the cruxes of the possible statements put forth by a given work of art is the aesthetic that accompanies it. Speaking in terms of music, I acknowledge details such as its title and the stylization thereof, as well as its cover art. The presentation of a musical work outside its oral content is key to both communicating the place from which the music comes, deconstructing the ideological biases that contribute inherently to the work, as well as enticing others to listen and subsequently relate to it. Equally as important to the deconstruction of a musical work, however, is the name to which it is attributed. The artist's name is not only practically important for the purposes of filing it under a certain letter in a record store, but is also where one's first exposure to the artist's expression of self often lies. The pseudonym has a similarly rich history in music. More historical instances of their use have explanations akin to their application in the world of literature. Classical composers such as Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven published their works under different names depending on the country in which they were being presented in an attempt to be more palatable for the citizens of that country. This trend persists into the modern day. The Italian-American singer Dino Paul Crocetti changed his name twice, once to Dino Martini and the second time to a fully Americanized moniker, Dean Martin, leaning fully into the audiences for which he performed. The pseudonym that has ingrained itself most into American pop culture, however, is that of Prince Rogers Nelson, known mononymously as Prince. Performing and releasing music under multiple different monikers over the course of his career, the artist, as he was also known, released several projects under the name, an original glyph known colloquially by fans as the love symbol, during a dispute regarding the terms of his contract between him and the record label to which he was signed. This symbol is an amalgamation of three crucial to Prince's identity as an artist and a human at large: the male and female gender symbols and the peace sign. Being arguably the most widely known androgynous pop figure of his time, the influence that this symbol, let alone his music, has had on artists in terms of their self-expression, as well as a profound growth in the confidence to do so, is one unmistakable. In the 1970s and 1980s, decades comprising a time period where gender identity was still heavily compartmentalized to the typical male-female binary in society at large, Prince was one of the most influential figures in breaking free from this binary through the means of artistic expression. His impact in the LGBTQ+ community, let alone on music as a whole, is one that only grows further immeasurable with the rapid-fire developments in the art form. It is his use of the pseudonym as not just a tool to obfuscate his true identity, but to build an entirely new and cutting-edge personality embodied in both physical and musical aspects that has gone on to inspire generations after him to embrace their own identities through similar means. In the present day, this has become all the more easily attainable with the internet, especially through platforms such as SoundCloud, where musicians can, within minutes, begin the process of virtual fragmentation, create new accounts under any given name, begin posting their musical works, and grow a community around them. Jane Remover, as mentioned briefly before, is one such example of this trend of pseudonymity. Besides publishing their primary works under her given name, she has released many other works to critical acclaim under a variety of names. Arguably, Remover's most famous alias is that with which she published the Daria Core trilogy of albums, credited to the names Leroy or Concern interchangeably. Some of her lesser-known aliases vary significantly in style, however. Adept at immersive world building, Remover has created multiple different alternate realities of sound with accompanying storylines to boot. Whether it be the fictional band Venturing, whose recordings are archived on a dedicated SoundCloud account by the character Violet, or the Jameson Bleached Waters Project, which catalogs the desolate, tenebrous soundscapes of a city whose water supply has been sabotaged with bleach by an unknown perpetrator, Remover has built for herself a repertoire of timbre at the age of 19 that plenty of artists are unable to reach across their entire careers. The online collaborative music database Rate Your Music, frequented in particular by those in their adolescence and early adulthood, houses plenty of modern examples of the trend of forming multiple identities under which different styles of music are released. Each artist cataloged on the site has a profile with an accompanying also known as section, where these aliases are contained. Artists with a Rate Your Music account, especially young members of the site, will often add themselves to the database, meticulously cataloging all the musical works that they have released to the public. From there, users often use the site's social features, such as following other users with similar musical taste and commenting on their page to gain a following towards their own creations. The breakcore project Lily of the Moon is one notable example. Comprising two identities of a person with dissociative identity disorder, both figures have their own separate entries in the database, as do all 5 of their alternate aliases. Another example is the works of the 14-year-old Canadian producer Elena Phoenix, totaling another 5 different pseudonyms under which they have released projects varying wildly in sound, from glitched ambiance to ethereal cloud rap. Countless further instances of this phenomenon can be found through exploration into the millions of albums that have been entered into the database since the site's inception in 2000, and through even a cursory deep dive, the correlation between LGBTQ musicians and the creation of alternate aliases signifying a different style or approach to production is a striking one that certainly warrants rich and in-depth discussion in the world of musicology. The previously mentioned historical figures that chose to identify themselves in their relative spheres certainly set precedents that would allow for this musical trend to take shape. However, I found it remiss to cite these figures as a sole root cause and to understate the impact of the internet on artists in the scene. Every artist hitherto mentioned that has utilized the tactic of virtual fragmentation for their artistic presence was born into an era where the internet almost totally defines the world around them, often entering the online world at a very young age. It is through this online world that these artists' identities were molded at an impressionable age, and whether it be for the better or the worse, the practices of the internet had become a substantial part of their identities. It is the idea of the username, by extension, which is a key factor in determining even a general origin point for this phenomenon as it presents itself in the modern electronic underground. This person, whose name I am too scared to pronounce, a member of the National Coalition of Independent Scholars, calls to attention several key facets of the username in her entry in the Oxford Handbook of Names and Naming on Pseudonyms, but crucially puts forth that they are predicated upon 2 points: restriction and self-reflection. Restriction comes from the limitations of the platform that the username is being registered on. For example, certain characters may be disallowed, and there may be a limit to how many characters can be used in the username. Self-reflection is inherent in the creation of a username due to both the concept of restriction and in the sense that the user often seeks to choose a name that represents themselves without giving their true identity away. Sonia Hoffer elaborates further in I Am They. As the internet has become more a necessity than a convenience to everyday life, the creation of multiple identities has followed a similar pattern. Herein lies the most basic form of identity found through anonymity. One's username becomes not just an extension of themselves, but a tabula rasa for a new self to be inscribed into. The musical pseudonym, in this way, seeks to link the artist to their work and add to it a more personable, intimate experience. More importantly, however, the process of pseudonym creation via virtual fragmentation serves as an outlet for musicians to experiment with their identity, both in the sense of their growth as a producer or performer, as well as their personal identity as it pertains to constructs like gender, sexual attraction, and the acceptance thereof. Electronic dance music as a genre, and as a scene, has historically been a similar outlet, in that it allowed for LGBTQ youths of generations previous to explore and accept their identities in a way that other facets of their lives may have inhibited. The genre was innovative and experimental by nature. Compared to popular music of the time that relied heavily on acoustic instrumentation, EDM was groundbreaking for the art form and created an entirely new space for artists to experiment and create sounds that had never been heard before. The internet, by comparison, was an outlet for experimentation with identity through its intrinsic anonymity at the time. Brand new identities could be created by persons looking to escape from their real-world identities. These two major innovations in self-expression, let alone global society, coalesce in the modern electronic underground scene and become an expansive space for today's youth to do just the same as EDM's earliest fans did nearly half a century ago. The story of the late transgender electronic producer Sophie Zion, known anonymously as Sophie, is arguably the finest example of all. She began her career as someone incredibly private, conducting very few interviews and revealing very little about her identity, and when she did, purposefully giving abstract and vague answers to the questions provided. As the years progressed, however, she would eventually come to embrace her identity as a trans woman and officially came out, or as she preferred, became visible with the release of It's Okay to Cry in late 2017. From then on, Zion was an outspoken advocate for LGBTQ+ youth across the globe, using her platform and emergence from the underground as a way to inspire others to embrace their own identities unashamedly through art, up until her untimely death in early 2021. In an interview with Paper Magazine following the release of her revolutionary debut album, Oil of Every Pearls on Insides, Zion summarized her experience with identity, anonymity, and music altogether matter-of-factly. There's no more rules here. The point is you are given the authority to choose yourself what feels right, what's going to allow you to live your best life. And it is no surprise that Remover cites Sophie as one of her greatest inspirations, actually making a reference to the aforementioned It's Okay to Cry in the last track off of Frailty. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that Jane Remover is a revolutionary figure in electronic music and music entirely. Saying that kind of thing is very trite nowadays, and the purpose of this video was to sort of give credence, give a little bit of backing to this idea that she is legit, like, a revolutionary figure. All this in-depth analysis of her work, of her presence, of her identity online is being done so early in her career, and I can imagine that we have a lot more to come. So, thank you for listening. I've been Ethan. Like and sub.